Well, today we're going to be reminded about where true wisdom actually comes from.
And wisdom seems to be a theme of this podcast over the last several weeks. We're talking about Solomon. Now here's James talking about the same thing.
Well,
so that's what we're talking about on HC Daily.
You're listening to another episode of HC Daily, a daily devotional podcast that you can listen to at home or on the go. We believe that you can grow as much as you want to grow spiritually, and this podcast can be a part of your daily growth plan. So, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, we're glad you're here. Now, let's join our hosts, Jeff Forrester and Chris Zarbaugh, in the studio.
Okay, Chris, so I had a question for you.
Yes.
I love doing exploration kind of things.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things that I've come across several times is like paintings in caves or paintings on the walls, of
You've
cliffs
personally
and stuff.
come across those
I've seen them,
things?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, they were already there, but I got to go see them, right?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, if you got somehow teleported back in time like 7,000 years ago,
Oh, yeah.
what kind of cave painting would you do to confuse all the people who found it later?
Oh, I would be very tempted to mess up the future.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
What I would want to do is first of all, if I was going to do this, I would want to paint the entire cave. And I would want to tell the entire story of the future so that when I came back to the future, what I would discover is that whole cave would have been like the cave of aliens probably. And there would be like a big shrine around it, and people would go there, and people would be able to predict the future by the things that I do.
So what things would you paint on the wall 7,000 years ago that would confuse people today?
Computers,
Cell phones.
cell phones, right? Technology, electricity, automobiles.
Okay.
And I would do all those things.
So if you had the power to travel through time, you would just mess with all the rest of us.
Yes,
is what
of
you're saying.
course. Just mess it all up.
Okay, that speaks volumes.
Hey, by the way-
We keep learning more and more and more about how amazing you are.
That's my funny answer. I wouldn't do that.
I would.
But it'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that.
That's a goofy question, but hey, we're running out of good questions to ask. So that's
Yeah. And by
we're over 100 episodes at this point. So
yeah,
hey,
well,
what do
we
we
just
ask
make
now?
up the questions, by the way. We don't know
Yeah.
what the other person's going to ask.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Well, we are continuing in James chapter 3.
Yes.
And this one is all about how true wisdom comes from God. We're going to start in verse 13. We'll just read to the end of the chapter.
Sure.
It says, "If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes with wisdom. But if you are bitterly jealous and there's selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure. It's also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness."
I actually, in a lot of ways, like these verses about wisdom better than the ones that Solomon gave.
Oh, wow.
Because, Solomon did give us practical instructions, and he talked about the value of wisdom. But I like how these go very specific. Like, for instance, my favorite part of this passage, it says, wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, you will find disorder and evil of every kind.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's sort of like a wisdom. It feels like a proverb, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But really, I love it because you can look at that and think, man, that's true.
Yeah.
It is totally true. If you think about all the environments that have humility and selfless ambition versus these environments, you're like, man, that is so unbelievably true.
Yeah.
And I love how this seems to sort of give us guidelines and promises for a lifetime.
Yeah.
That's what these sentences are.
A lot of Solomon's proverbs, the wisdom he gives are do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, right?
Right.
That's his. Whereas James is kind of summarizing the consequences of wisdom and the consequences of foolishness. He summarizes more of them. So the outcomes, he tends to, James is very much, because he's so action oriented, tends to be outcome oriented as well, right? And that's what he's talking about here. So he says, if you're wise and understand God's ways, how would I understand God's ways?
Yeah, by living an honorable life.
Well, by knowing the Lord's words. right? So the only way I can know God's ways.
You're saying, how do I know? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the only way I can know God's ways is God's words. And then you prove it by living an honorable life. And that honorable life is measured by God's words. It's not measured by me and what I think is honorable. It's measured by what God says is honorable. And then it's good works with the humility that comes from wisdom.
So I heard a series a long time ago I used to attend North Point Church before I moved up to Atlanta. And there was a whole series called There's an App for That.
Uh-huh.
And so the whole series was based on the technology of us downloading apps. Mm-hmm. So it had that sort of like marketing theme, whatever. Yeah. But the whole point is that the hook behind it was there's an application for that.
Yeah.
Right. So whenever you read a verse, the catchphrase is, well, there's an app for that. Right? There's an application. Yeah. And so that's why I love this. This is so encompassing. It says, if you're wise and you understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life. And what he's really saying is he's saying, like, unless you decide to implement God's wisdom, you're not really going to prove, it's not going to be evidenced or shown in your life in any way.
Yeah, right.
And then he goes on and talks about all those life principles, which is just wonderful.
So then he warns us then, so there's the right way, but then there's also the selfish ambition. He's really challenging our hearts here, right? Because he says jealousy or selfish ambition in your heart. So we have to look at, at work, should you assert yourself? Should you look for opportunity to improve? Should you look for opportunities to move your career forward? Sure. But is it a selfish ambition? Is it a heart thing? What's your heart motivation behind it? Is it just for your pride? Is it just for your improvement? Is it just for your advancement? Or is it that you believe God's built you this way and you're going to bring honor to God in the advancement and all those kinds of things? So there's a heart challenge. It's not just about ambition is not selfish by itself. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So ambition is something that God places in us. We're wired, most of us, to want to improve our position. But the bigger challenge, quite honestly, is this a heart thing that it's only selfish and for me, or is it that I want to be everything God made me to be? There's a challenge in that. And then he says the flip side of it winds up being all these evil things, right? He says it's earthly, unspiritual, and even demonic. And so a lot of times we think, our failures or our weaknesses are just, that's just how I am. And he goes, actually, it's unspiritual and demonic. And we have to really understand that those battles going on in us are not just good guy, bad guy. It's spiritual and evil. Yeah. Spiritual and demonic that's going on in our life.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, when you said that just a few minutes ago about like, should you not be able to have some sort of ambition at work, that benefits yourself. And the example I thought, just bear with me on this, is I grew up in Ohio.
I bear with you on almost everything you say. So go ahead.
So I grew up in Ohio, and Youngstown is like on the border of Pennsylvania. Uh-huh. So I grew up around, consequently, a lot of Amish, like a ton. Like every time you go into Pennsylvania, you're going to see them everywhere, right?
Right.
And so like I was just constantly around the Amish, and I love the Amish, by the way. And if you were to buy a barn, you don't go to Home Depot.
Absolutely, and great cheese.
You just drive straight over to Pennsylvania and get the best barn you've ever. Anyway, the point is that I remember one time talking with a couple at a restaurant somewhere. They were an Amish couple, and I said something about, "Can I take a picture with you or something?" I don't know. I was pretty young, and they said, "Well, oh no, the Amish don't believe in taking pictures." Have you ever heard this?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's the image of God. So they're made in the image of God, and they feel like they shouldn't have their picture taken.
Well,
because it's a prideful thing.
Yeah, there it is, right there. That's they never mentioned the image of God thing, but the lady said, "Well, no, it's taking pictures is a prideful thing for the Amish." And I thought, so I sat there, and it's always stuck with me. And I thought, are you trying to tell me every time I take a picture, like we just had family photos taken, right? Like they would never do that. And it's like, is there a prideful thing? Well, obviously no, right?
It's a heart thing.
I want family pictures with my family, right? And in a lot of ways, it's the opposite. So I beat myself up over this thing for years as a kid. Yeah. And I'm like, every time I take a picture, it's prideful. So all that to say this.
Well, I think this is.
But yeah, selfies in the bathroom.
Right? All those people. Instagram is full of prideful people.
It could be
right?
that way.
Yeah.
But to say no photos ever, right? Because of that.
It's the heart. The heart is the issue.
That's what I was trying to get at. Is trying to get at the fact that like it's not to say that you can't ever have a single moment of selfish ambition if it's ambition that benefits you, for instance, getting ahead in the company, or if it's an ambition that, right? So don't beat yourself up over, because really what he's doing is he's talking about the condition of the heart.
Yeah.
And if you live as a selfish person, who put yourself above people. That's what James is referring to.
Right.
Right. So let's not freak out about the
And
little
a lot
parts
of us
things.
don't think of ourselves as being jealous and selfish.
Right.
But our actions oftentimes are jealous and selfish actions.
Unconsciously.
Yeah.
So-
Where we become hyper competitive with somebody else in the office.
Yeah.
And it's because we're jealous of them, right? Or we're being selfish. We don't want them to win. And the way that you can tell whether or not you're selfish and jealous is, can somebody else win and you celebrate their win without you feeling like, I hate them because they won, or they're richer than me, or they make more money than me. I think in our culture today, we think what we live on is about right. And anybody who makes more than us, well, they're probably criminals, or they're horrible people, or we hate it when somebody signs a big contract, or we hate it when somebody gets some big improvement. Then there's probably some kind of jealous issue in our own life. We can't let somebody else just succeed. We're jealous of them. And that is a spiritual issue.
Yeah, it's definitely one indicator, a strong indicator, I would definitely
And he
say.
says, then those things, our jealousy and our selfishness, lead to disorder and evil of almost every kind. Because then we wind up sacrificing a lot of our own, a lot of the moral things that God would call us to, in order to try to achieve the things that we're jealous in others, or trying to just fulfill our own selfish ambitions.
And then he goes on and says, but the wisdom from above is first of all pure.
Yeah.
Right? It's also peace-loving and gentle at times and willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and good deeds, shows no favoritism. It reminds me sort of the definition of love a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Love is patient, love is kind. Love is not selfishly ambitious. And when he talks about wisdom from God, let me just say this. I remember the first time that I felt like a new person when I received Christ. And I remember the first time I reacted differently to somebody saying something about me, or the first time that I was content with doing something that was selfless, or maybe perhaps being kind when I didn't want to, or forgiving. It really is. If you are filled with a peace, you are filled with things that are lovely and pure and gentleness. I'm telling you what, even the roughest of guys can feel those things on the inside.
Absolutely.
And absolutely just be overwhelmed with gratitude because that it comes from God. It's not natural.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So, the Bible is its own best commentary. So we love reading these little notes in our study Bibles, and they're great and they're really useful. But the Bible really is its own best commentary. And when you're able to connect what the Bible says, right now we're talking about what the Bible says about wisdom. So when I think about the big picture of all that the Bible has said about wisdom, Solomon told us that wisdom is the principal thing. It's the most important thing. Above everything else, get wisdom. And then he says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And that fear of the Lord is honoring and respecting him in the right way, right? That's what it is. So then when I understand that God's goal for me is not for me just to be happy and to have all my wildest dreams come true. God's goal for me, the Bible says in the book of Romans, his purpose for me is to grow up to become like Jesus. Then if I'm honoring God and I'm seeking godly wisdom like this is talking about, I should start looking more and more and more like Jesus. And then when you look at Galatians, it talks about the fruit of Spirit and God in our life will be love and joy and peace and gentleness and kindness and self-control, all those kinds of things. You read this and you begin to realize godly wisdom produces those same things. What's happening is the fruit of the Spirit and godly wisdom are causing us to become more and more like Jesus. And that's why when you say it kind of looks like the description of love, because God is love. Right? That's the connection. Godly wisdom will lead us to become more like Jesus. The fruit of the Spirit in our life will lead us to become more like Jesus. And it turns out we'll start looking more like Jesus. Right? It's pretty cool.
That's a good day.
Yeah.
It's a good day. When we get to heaven, we'll be finally absolutely, conformed to the image of His Son, and that'll be a good day.
And so when you go through those things, right, willing to yield to others. I mean, when you asked me to bear with you just a minute ago, and I say I always do.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Thanks for that, by the way.
Yeah.
It's very generous of you.
And is always sincere. Shows no favoritism. I think when it talks about no favoritism, it's class, certainly, rich versus poor, shows no favoritism. But race was a major issue in this day, right? In the Roman Empire, and I think it still is today. Shows no favoritism. I think that there's so many things where the more I become like Jesus, the more everybody matters to me, right? Everybody matters. Everybody's betterment for in their life would become more important to me if I'm going to be more like Jesus. And then is always sincere. I think you can tell. You can tell who the sincere people are, and you can tell the people who are just trying to draw a crowd and get more followers on Instagram. And then it all leads to finally peacemakers.
Yeah.
Right? And if we would do the work of planting seeds of peace, we'll reap a harvest of righteousness. This is why earlier when we were talking about the tongue setting a fire, the first thing to do is to go, I'm sorry. When you realize, don't let it run into a wildfire, say I'm sorry. Because when you plant seeds of peace over and over and over again in your marriage, you'll reap a harvest of peace in your life, right? And that ultimately, love and wisdom lead us to being a peacemaker. So,
yeah, as silly as it sounds, if you plant corn and then all of a sudden you run out there and you realize you have corn, nobody goes, oh my, corn, what in the world, right? And no farmer should ever be surprised. And yet we don't live our lives that way. We don't think of it that way, but over and over in the Bible it says you're going to sow what you sow, you're going to reap. Yeah. And Galatians tells us that. Yep. And here James does, and so many other places. Yep. And so you plant peace, you're going to get peace.
Yeah. I learned that lesson one time. This is kind of corny. We were doing corn.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. So we used to grow a lot of corn, a lot of table corn, and then we'd freeze it. And I can remember one time we were in the process of just cutting the kernels off of the cob. We were getting ready to freeze a bunch of corn. And my dad said, you know that verse where it says that you reap what you sow? I said, yeah. He said, look at all these kernels we got from planting one kernel. We planted one kernel, and we got hundreds of kernels off of that ear of corn. And we got 2 ears of corn from a stalk. So we got hundreds and hundreds of kernels from one. This is what happens in our life, is we plant a little bit of discord. We plant a little bit of fire. We wind up, it's just little. It seems like it's a little thing, but the harvest comes back way bigger. And then we're always surprised that our spouse is holding bitterness or holding all this anger. It's because we planted a little bit and got a lot more back. But the other side, if we plant love and sincerity and peace over and over and over and over and over again, that'll come back too. The harvest will come to us, and you get way more than you plant.
It reminds me. There's a lot of wisdom in Kung Fu Panda. When Oogway says, "You may wish for an apple tree or an orange, but you will get a peach." When he plants the peach seed in the ground. Yeah. That's really good.
That's amazing.
There it is. See, you know why? Because all true wisdom comes from God.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
I'm not sure what you just said.
That's the theme song for Kung Fu Panda.
I know, but I was trying to.
I know. I
wisdom.
don't know, man. I think we blew it.
No, it was great.
Okay.
Hey, we'll see you at chapter 4 tomorrow.
Hopefully, it'll be better.
On HC Daily.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word by liking this episode and sharing it on your social media platforms. Be sure to leave a comment and review, and don't forget to give us 5 stars. When you do, you help us reach even more people who need a daily devotional like HC Daily. If you'd like to hear more from Chris and Jeff, they're both teaching pastors at Heritage Church, located in Southeast Michigan. You can get more of their messages by clicking on the Messages tab at heritagechurch.com. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode of HC Daily.